Hello, everyone. This is Talk Time with Cynthia. I'm coming today, and we're going to be reading from backwards. The Black Tax: The Cost of Being Black in America. And for those of you that have, been following, it's Sean D. Rochester. And so, for those of you who have been following, it's a continuation. For those of you that have not been following, you can go to my playlist and find it there. Okay. And the subtitle, and we're almost there, guys. The subtitle is Get Your PhD. Pay attention to the letters PhD. It says, the second paradigm is centered on the concept of purchasing, hiring, and depositing within the Black community on a consumer, corporate, and public sector level. I'm going to try to put it up there so I'm not looking down so much. I'm trying anyway. Okay, and then it says PhD is a acronym for purchase, hire, and deposit. Anyone who is interested in economic development within the broader African American community should have as a core part of their strategy a focus on purchasing products and services from Black enterprises. Hiring Black Americans into well-paying jobs and depositing funds in Black financial institutions. A focus on PhD addresses the pervasive and devastating problems of African Americans continually spending and depositing 98% of their resources outside of Black-owned financial and business enterprises on business and enterprises which in turn do not purchase, hire, and deposit into the Black community on any level. This cataclysmic combination has created a substantially depressive effect on employment, business creation and development, wealth creation, and financial and political dependence on Black America. To reduce the impact on the Black tax and create an environment that will facilitate the closing of the 6 million job gaps and 1.4 million businesses gap in the Black community, and 8 trillion of missing net worth requires a foundation based on economic development and employment driven by the concept of getting your PhD. Getting your PhD is about facilitating trade and commerce with Black employees, businesses, and financial institutions to create a solid foundation for wealth accumulation. Then it says, if Black enterprises are not represented in a company or institution's supply chain, Black employees are not represented on their payroll, or Black financial institutions are not represented where they deposit their money. Not only are these businesses or enterprises not facilitating economic development in the African American community, they are depressing it. Remember that, guys. So it says, to the extent that consumers, especially African American consumers and those who work toward our otherwise support the idea of job and business creation within the Black community. Purchase, hire, and deposit with Black enterprises, they will be able to have 100 times more impact on Black economic development than they otherwise would. Now, guys, we're going on to the power of purchasing. Consider the following statistics, which represent trillions of dollars of spending. African Americans spend 2% of their 1.2 trillion spending power on Black businesses. Corporations spend hundreds of billions on their supply chain, and less than 2% of that purchasing power is spent with Black businesses. The the federal government spends close to $6 billion annually buying goods and services from its suppliers, and has a target of 5% of that earmarked for disadvantaged businesses. However, substantially less than 5% goes to Black enterprises. Purchasing is about consumers, businesses, and governments, CBGs. Purchasing products and services from Black enterprises, whether they are a consumer, a business, or a government. If you are interested in creating jobs and businesses within the Black community, the purchasing of goods and services from Black enterprises must be a priority within your supply chain strategy. Remember, your supply chain is comprised of the businesses that you purchase goods and services from to achieve your personal and business objectives, since it is unwise to expect others to prioritize something that you do not, right? You should make purchasing goods and services from Black enterprises a priority. You should also engage and, whenever possible, require those with whom you do business to also prioritize purchasing products and services from Black enterprises. This is virtually important because the demand for goods and services drive the need for employment, job creation at existing businesses, and the creation of new businesses to make any excess demand. Since African Americans and other CGBs spend less than 2% of their resources on African American goods and services, A slight increase in demand could have a massive impact on job creation and business development. The potential to stimulate job creation is far greater than most people understand. While it is widely known that black consumers have a purchasing power of 1.2 trillion, what is not widely understood is that economic impact of African American purchasing power supports 24 million jobs in the U.S. economy. In the U.S. economy, unfortunately, most of all the economic impact of the purchasing power occurs outside of the black community because African American consumers spend less than 2% of their 1.2 trillion income on black enterprises. To put this in perspective, U.S. consumers purchase 70% of all goods and services from all services produced in America, while black consumers spend under 2% of their income on services produced by black businesses. Sorry, guys. This is a huge missed opportunity because purchasing products and services from black enterprises drives incremental employment within those enterprises and within their suppliers base. This means that employees also make purchases from other companies that induce even more employment, right? Then it says for every additional job within a black enterprise, direct employment, another job is created within their supply chain, and another is created from the economic activity of those employees. Because the black enterprises use the highest concentration of black employees, in most cases up to 75% of those jobs will be from the black community. U.S. corporations spend hundreds of billions of dollars on their supply chains, but only 2% of that spending is with black communities. The federal government also purchases nearly $600 billion a year and has a target for 5% of the spending to go to disadvantaged businesses. Since many of the largest black enterprises are suppliers of product and services in corporate and government supply chains, a greater representation of black-owned businesses within corporate and government supply chains would stimulate massive demands for more employment within existing black enterprises. So it works, guys. It would also attract capital to form new businesses to meet any incremental unmet demands. Since black enterprises currently employ almost 1 million people and black representation in corporate and government supply chain is so low, even a small increase in demand could generate the need for 1 million to 2 million additional jobs. So yeah, guys, so a little shift makes a great difference. And then it says the next title is the power of hiring. Let me wet my whistle. I don't want to start coughing and then can't start. And then it says the power of hiring. Consider the following statistics. So these are the statistics, guys. Bullet point 1. 93% of black-owned businesses rely on 50% or more minorities to fill available jobs, while 60% of white small businesses have 0 minority employees. Bullet point 2. African Americans account for 2.7% of senior level staff in the financial industry, despite borrowing $150 billion per year to finance home and auto purchases. Bullet point 3. Blacks are less than 2%, which is 1%, of film executives and directors who are members of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science membership, despite generating 13% of annual growth receipts, or $1.3 billion a year. Bullet point 4 is, and the final bullet point is, blacks make up about 2% of recent hires at tech firms, despite being massive consumers of technology and social media. Overall, in terms of purchasing, African Americans spend $1.2 trillion and support 24 million jobs in the U.S. Economy. While many of these jobs are high skilled and well paying, few are held by African Americans. These are assorted reasons for this. Some are nefarious, like explicit bias. Some are unintentional, like implicit bias. Others are due to the lack of social and financial networks. However, regardless of the cause, the impact is an extremely low representation of African Americans within the payroll of many companies that depend on black consumers. This low representation also depresses the earning power of large numbers of black workers and reduces their ability to accumulate wealth. Think of it this way. When you buy a good or service, you are engaging in trade, and the purpose of trade is to leave both parties in a better position than before the trade. If your community, region, or state is in need of investment, then your participation in, in trade should facilitate meeting that need. If you are the seller, you can use your profits to address the need. If you are a buyer, you can and should encourage the seller to invest in your economic development to secure your business. If trading with you is profitable, then the seller will invest accordingly to secure your excuse me, business. This is not the case with African American consumers because number one, African Americans had never been allowed to impose any significant requirements on those who do business in our communities. And number two, it has now become normal to trade without demanding or expecting more for our money, which is now over 1.2 trillion. To spend over 1 trillion per year and not expect or require meaningful investments in African American economic development encourages exploitation, not investment. One of the most potent way to spur economic development is through employment, which allows consumers to support their families, invest in their communities, and consume more. However, there are millions of African Americans missing from the payroll of various communities and institutions because there is little incentive to hire more African Americans. As we have seen in part 1 and 2, biases against Black Americans is sufficient, long lasting, and has mostly evolved from a conscious to subconscious state. So waiting for people to change on their own would not be a wise strategy. People are more likely to change their behavior when they have an incentive to do so. If your jobs or profit margin is affected by their level of hiring African Americans, they will have plenty of incentive to hire more. It is also important to understand the power of marginal economics since the average company is not very profitable. Small changes in let's give you the numbers. The average profit margin of most companies are between 3 to 4%. Small changes in revenue can have a large effect on profitability. Therefore, changes in African American spending patterns can have a significant impact on company profit margins, or spending does matter, and our spending does matter and should be prioritized with companies that invest in us. When we spend money with a company, we should think about it as a form of investment. And in exchange for our investment, we should receive a quality product or a service, and they should also invest in us. One of the best ways to invest in a community is to employ people within the community. And I'm gonna read that one line again because I feel like it's so important. One of the best ways to invest in a community is to employ people within the community. And I believe in that so strong, guys. Okay. All right. I think I'm gonna read this part here, and then I'm gonna be done for today. Then it says the power of deposits. That's another subtitle. It says 0.04% of all U.S. deposits are the equivalent of $4 out of every 10,000 deposit is in black-owned banks. If deposits in black banks were proportional to the U.S. black population, it would be closer to 1,400 out of every 10,000 instead of just $4 out of every 10,000. And that's the first bullet point, guys. The second bullet point is to make matters worse. African Americans deposit just 2% of their total deposit with black-owned banks, which leaves black banks with an extremely limited ability to fund the growth and expansion of black businesses. Meanwhile, black businesses receive higher interest rates and higher denial rates than white businesses with the same credit. Black, Hispanic, and Asian minority-owned banks have 194 billion of assets. 2.5% of those deposits are in black-owned banks. Black-owned small businesses receive less than 2%, which is 1.4% of all loan money distributed through the Small Business Association. Excuse me, y'all. To better understand the power of deposit, let's first look at banking. The banking system is the lifeblood of every economy. No country or state can be strong, financially secure, if it does not have a strong banking system. Banks collect and hold deposit from their customers and extend credit to businesses and individuals with those deposits. This process of holding deposit and powering loans creates additional money within the economy and is called the money multiplier effect. Think of it this way. If you deposit $10 in a bank, the Federal Reserve requires the bank to hold a certain portion in reserve. This means that there is a certain amount of the $10 deposit that the bank won't be able to lend and must keep on hand. The amount the bank has to keep on hand Okay, y'all. That was my phone, and I'm sorry about that. Okay, so it said this means that there is a certain amount of the $10 deposit that the bank won't be able to lend and must keep on hand. The amount the bank has to keep on hand or hold in reserve is typically about 10%. This means the bank can lend $9 of the $10 that was deposited. The person who receives the $9 loan will likely deposit this money into a bank, and that bank will be required to hold 90 cents in reserve and can lend $8.10, and so on and so forth. In a well functioning financial market, this process will continue until the initial $10 of deposit. In a well functioning financial market, this process will continue until the initial $10 of deposit has led to the creation of $100 in incremental deposits. This can create a 10 times or 10x money multiplier effect on every deposit. This can create, okay, I'm reading the same thing. And then it says this is uh, vitally important because African Americans have over 130 billion deposited in various banks, but only 2% is in black owned banks. While black Americans could be creating a massive money multiplier effect within the banking system, almost all of it is outside of the black community. This strive this starves the this starves black businesses and consumers of much needed capital, exposing them to the cost of implicit and explicit bias. The black tax the black tax in the financial system. Let me read that again. This starves black businesses and consumers of much needed capital, exposing them to the cost of explicit bias in the financial system. And ultimately, um, subsidize subsidize the level of discrimination that black businesses and consumers continually faces. The banking system generally works in the following way. Consumers, businesses, and government, CBG, makes deposit in banks. Banks provide credit for CBG. CBGs spend money to fund their needs. This spending stimulates production, which in turn leads to employment, and employment creates more deposits in the U.S. economy. CBGs have 11 trillion of deposits within the banking system. And like I said, CBG is consumer, business, and government. Okay. in the U.S. economy. CBGs have 11 trillion of deposits within the banking system. Banks have made 15 trillion in loans to CBG. CBG spend 8.5 trillion. 18.5 trillion, which supports 152 million civilian jobs. U.S. banks employ 2.1 million employers and are the circulatory system for the U.S. economy. This is why banks are bailed out during financial crisis, and consumers are left to fend for themselves. There can be no transformative and sustainable economic development within the African American community if Black Americans do not place deposits in their own banks and require others who wish to do business with them to do the same. If Black Americans move their 130 billion of deposits to Black-owned banks, those banks will immediately have to hire 31,000 employees across many different departments, from IT to sales to human resources to financial to compliance, to tellers, from top to bottom, and spend billions or more to upgrade their facilities, IT infrastructure, and their supply chain. This will generate another 70 jobs within these supply chains. The net effect would be the creation of 100,000 new jobs, many of which can be sourced with Black talent. These Black banks would also be able to lend 120 billion to Black consumers and businesses that need capital for homes, business expansion, and real estate development. This would increase the capital available to Black businesses and consumers by 30 times. And here we go. And given that startup capital to Black enterprises has been funded almost exclusively by undercapitalized Blacks for about 400 years. The impact would be a game changer. This would allow Black enterprises for the first time to have access to sufficient capital to truly compete and thrive through their full business life cycle. Startup, ramp up, expand, and mature. To be clear, discrimination in credit markets on the biases of race and ethnicity is well documented by researchers and is starving Black businesses of much needed capital, so much so that only 6% of Black businesses say that their primary sources of credit comes from banks. less than 1% of black businesses in a Pepperdine supply, I mean, Pepperdine study were able to get a small business administration backed loan. A 2016 report for the Association for Enterprise Opportunity found that number one, 80% of black businesses desired financing for planned growth or expansion. Number two, 73% of black businesses owners indicate that the current business financing environment is restricting their ability to hire new employees. And number three, the funding gap in businesses loans for black businesses could be almost 9 billion, given that black businesses currently employ almost 1 million people. If they received enough business loans to close this 9 billion gap, it could easily lead to the hiring of another 500,000 employees. This 9 billion funding gap could be closed in short order if African Americans deposit a mere 10% of their deposits in black banks. If African Americans had a well functioning banking system where black consumers, businesses, employees, institutions, and supply chain, along with CBGs that want to facilitate an economic development within the black community, deposit their money in black banks. Those deposits could create over 1 trillion of incremental lending and deposits via the money multiplier effects. This would also have the additional benefit of causing non-black banks and financial institutions to compete for black deposits and black customers, which would cause them to put systems in place to reduce anti-black biases and discrimination. These financial institutions would not tolerate discrimination against black customers and businesses regardless of the source, cause, or intent, especially implicit or explicit bias, if the discrimination negatively affects their profit margin. Okay, so in other words, it seemed like you're saying to me, get them in the pocket, so to speak. But I just want to say thank you guys so much. That was the next thing I'm gonna be doing. Let me read this because I always like to read the little sayings that they have. By developing a full understanding of those factors that define one's relationship with one's adversary, and by actively controlling and shaping the situation so that the weaknesses of one adversary are exposed to one's acquired strength. one is able to ride the forces of circumstances to victory. And that was by the Art of War, Sun Tzu. Tzu? TZU. Okay. So anyway, yeah. And so we got a little bit more that we're gonna be doing. So which that's gonna be my next video. But what I do want to say, thank you guys so much for sitting to the end of the video. I really appreciate that for you all who do. But don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to tell your family and your friends what your girl Sin is doing, because we try to keep it popping over here on the positive side. Love, peace, understanding, joy, unity. Trying to bring the cultures together. Not to make you exclude your culture, but to bring all the culture together. Us as a race, to unify and make a difference and get rid of all the hatred and all the pain that was caused because of whatever. We do care about what and why. That's the whole purpose of reading this book, so that we can figure it out and move forward, right? So anyway, I love you guys so much, and I thank you, and I love you. Bye.